Welcome everybody to our next edition of LinkedIn Live, where this series that we're in is called Value Undiscovered, where we're going down a journey of looking at digital transformation and advanced analytics and how it's being used in major corporations around the world to be able to solve capital planning challenges. Today, I have some very interesting industry experts with us today as part of our interviewing conversation, where we're going to look at, do you understand the value of your portfolio and what it means to your organization? How about your portfolio of projects and how is it helping your organization to achieve your goals and objectives, all while reducing risk exposure, maximizing profits, and achieving your sustainability goals? My experts today have actual hands-on experience in the industry. Stick with me. You are not going to want to miss this. Hey, welcome to the live broadcast today, Dan and Cicely. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you, Mark.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Very good. Hey, Dan, let's start with you. Dan, where are you located today?
Yeah, I live in Houston, Texas. I'm in my home office, and it's good to be with you.
How's the weather? I see we have some snow and cold weather coming. Is everything okay down there?
I think it's okay. It was a little foggy today, but it's certainly no snow here yet. So
fantastic. That's good. All right, Cicely, how about you? Where are you located today?
I'm in Norman, Oklahoma, and I'll let you know when the snow rolls in. I'm pretty sure it's going to hit here first.
I saw there was going to be 24 inches of snow in St. Louis, just slightly north of where you are. That's rough.
Hopefully they'll get most of it.
Yeah, good. Yeah, absolutely. Hey, listen, let's start off this broadcast today. Dan, can you tell us who you are and what do you do?
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I'm a retired engineer. I spent over 40 years in the chemical and refining industries. I worked for Chevron Phillips Chemical Company as a senior VP of manufacturing, left there in 2015 and joined LyondellBasell for another 5+ years. And I left there in August of 2020, and I was the executive vice president over global manufacturing and projects.
Fantastic. I always love having, industry experience on the broadcasts because it really brings a different perspective. And so we're looking forward to having the conversation. Thanks for joining us today. Cicely, can you tell us who you are and what do you do?
Hi, yes, I'm Cicely Striolo, and I work in Copperleaf's market development team. I'm one of the market development managers, and I'm focused on oil and gas and helping with the chemicals market as well. And I spent the last about year and a half or so working with some of the biggest companies in the world, manage their asset base and help them improve their capital planning process to be more aligned to their strategic goals, to help them maximize their risk reduction. And yeah,
perfect. No, that's good. That's great. And I understand you also have a chemical engineering background and some industry experience as well, right?
That's correct. That's right. I started my career working with Dan, helping to monitor heat exchangers. And I worked with him again in our strategy team, managing the capital budget for Chevron Phillips.
Great. Interesting mix of conversation today. So listen, for those of you watching today, I'm looking forward to having this conversation with these two industry experts here. But before we get going, let me just ask you for a little bit of a favor. We always want to get our message out. You know that for those of you that have watched me, that I'm passionate about digital transformation and helping people in industries to be successful and using digital to implement and to be successful in the industry. If you'd help us out and share this broadcast, I'd really appreciate it. If you look right down there where you have the opportunity to be able to share the broadcast, you can share it with other people or friends. Please do that for us. It really helps us get the word out. And then also, this is a live broadcast right now, and we want comments and we want questions. And we're going to talk about the live comments and questions during the broadcast. So right down there in the comment box, you can put your questions in there. Hey, one of the things I like to do when we kick off the broadcast always is I like to know where people are watching from. It's always fun because we have people in North America, we have people in South America, usually in the Middle East and in Europe that are all watching at the same time. And so if you're watching, I'd really appreciate it if you could just put your name in the box and tell me where you're watching from, and we'll put your name up on the screen and give you a little shout out. just give me a shout out and let me know where you are and where you're watching from. It'd be great. Hey, listen, let's kick off this conversation today. And what I always like to do is I like to start by kind of looking at what's happening in the world today and how it's impacting the industries that we're in. And so, both of you having been in the oil and gas industry and chemicals industries, and also in digital as well, have an interesting perspective on things that are happening. Dan, let me start with you and just ask you is that what are some of the key things that are happening out there in the world today that are impacting the ability of these industries to be successful?
Well, I think of kind of three current trends that are really important. There's many things to think about, but one is risk management, how to manage risks and how to do it at the best cost possible. Really critical because these industries are so competitive. And you see a lot of issues with the supply chain today. And sometimes maybe those risks weren't managed as well as they could have been. But these risks can be everything from safety, environmental, regulatory, supply chain risks, those sorts of things, reliability types of things. The second one is just talent. And there's a lot of old folks like me that are retiring and leaving the industry. And it's a critical industry. It needs talented people. So attracting, retaining, developing that talent is super critical. And then I would say ESG, environment, social, and corporate governance. Those issues are critical. And we can talk more about each of these, but all of those are putting pressure on the industry to improve. And it's a good thing. I think it'll make the industry better, but they're really important things that we're working on all the time.
Okay, just to make sure I understood what you heard, you said risk and cost, and we said retaining top talent or having the labor that we need and meeting corporate goals and objectives. Very good. That's very good. Cicely, how about you? You spent a lot of time in the industry. Have you seen things out there happening today that are affecting companies and their ability to be successful in the industry?
Yes, I really just want to reinforce what Dan said. I think I see the same kind of trends. In the UK water utilities, we saw a lot of regulatory pressure and looking at triple bottom line, ESG kind of themes. And if you look at transport here in the US, you see a lot about equity and resilience. So there's quite a lot out there at the moment about not just looking at the bottom line for profitability. Of course, you always have to manage risk for your asset base, but really looking at these more qualitative elements in including those in the decision-making process.
Yeah, there are really so many outside factors that affect us and, cause our businesses to drive, in different directions and things like that. I can see that. So you guys brought up risk and cost, and you brought up, labor and shortages and ESG initiatives and regulatory impacts and things like that. So those are all factors that are affecting us. Well, I think we should probably dig into some of those things a little bit deeper as we go forward. Dan, I wanted to dig at, I'm intrigued by some of your background and some of your experience, having worked in industry for so many years. And I was wondering if you could just share with me a little bit about, some of the challenges that you ran across or that you experienced when you were, in industry, a little bit about your history. I'd like to know just a little bit more about you and what you were doing and some of those challenges that you faced in industry.
Well, I think, so the first and foremost thing in any of these type of industries is safety and environment. You have to perform excellent in those things because, we talked about talent management, but it starts with safety and environmental control because who wants to work for a company that doesn't have a great safety record or environmental record, or what community wants a business like that in their community that doesn't have a great record? So I think, those are key things, but then past that, you really get into it's a fiercely competitive industry, and it always has been, and it's changing all the time. And I think the pace of change is really faster now than it's ever been, to be honest.
So Dan, as you worked in industry, then I guess the first thing you brought up is safety, and risk management. Boy, it makes perfect sense when you're talking about chemical companies and things like that, safety. And so what kind of challenges, did you find yourself, being able to meet those objectives in industry? I guess there had to have been some struggles that you went through over the years to be able to figure out how to meet those, right? You were in manufacturing How
Right.
did you go about figuring out how to meet those challenges?
Well, many of our plants are 40 plus years old, and they're constantly renewed. And we do turnarounds every 5 to 8 years on units, and we basically renew the unit. And we have to be very good about identifying what needs to be done and doing it very efficiently, because if you don't, you can't afford it, right? That's it. And then just normal kind of maintenance. So these plants have operated for years, and then continually you're trying to keep them to where they operate well, safely and reliably, but also you're trying to make them more efficient. And so if you can lower the cost of the unit or increase production, those things are directly go to the bottom line. So you can sustain operations and keep the profitability basically at whatever level, and then you can invest to actually increase profitability by either increasing capacity and or increasing efficiency or lowering cost of the unit. So those are all challenges that continue.
So you brought up a couple of terms that I just wanted to make sure that I understand and listeners and viewers, understand. You brought up the word turnaround. Just sometimes people don't always understand every technical term that's out there. Can you explain quickly what a turnaround is?
Yeah, a lot of these continuous operations units literally operate 24/7, 365 days a year. You'd like them to never shut down until you plan to shut them down. You don't want to have to shut them down for some reliability reason. Something breaks and you have to shut the unit down. So it takes a lot of energy, a lot of potential environmental impacts to either start up and shut down a unit. So you want to make sure it's planned well and executed perfectly. So a turnaround is a planned event that says, we are going to take this unit down. We are going to clean, inspect, and repair. We may install some projects during that turnaround that either improve the safety or efficiency or reliability of the unit. And then we're going to come back. These turnaround windows might last 50 days and they might cost, $50 or more million. So they're huge events. And that event is a part of the sustaining capital that we use to keep the unit operating at its peak performance and minimal risk.
Okay, and so you classified that as sustaining capital. So that would be one category of where you're in your experience that you were planning to spend capital was in sustaining capital then, right?
Right. Yeah, we think of sustaining as things like reliability, safety, environment, regulatory, things you need to do to continue to operate the plant at whatever its design capacity is.
Okay, perfect. Cicely, you made a little comment earlier on, said that you have been involved in, early in your career in some heat exchangers. Is that what you said? Or
yeah, that's right.
Would you consider that to be part of a sustaining operation, or what is that? Help me understand that a little bit better.
Absolutely. One of the first things I had to do working in the ethylene unit at Chevron Phillips was going around and monitor the heat exchangers for what we called fouling. So looking to see the efficiencies that the heat exchangers were maintaining as far as exchanging that heat between the cold streams and the hot streams, and recognizing when it was time that we needed to plan an intervention to go through and clean that out so we could maintain the efficiency and keep the plant running, humming along like it was meant to.
Okay, good, great. So Dan, if those are sustaining operations, then what is like another category of where capital expenditures go?
Yeah, I think the next one is to generate more profit. And the ones of these that seem to get the most press are the big announcements for the big new plant, right? And so we're going to build a new ethylene unit. We're going to build a new polyethylene unit or whatever it is. And everybody pays attention to that. And they should. They're really important projects. They can be billions of dollars. But a lot of the profit generating projects are spent in existing plant operations. And they're kind of additional to sustaining capital in that they're making an existing unit. They're debottlenecking it. They're allowing it to make more of a given product. They're allowing it to make it at a less cost. Maybe you're going to use a cheaper feedstock and you're going to make some modifications so that happens, or you're going to make the unit more energy efficient. So you're going to run the same unit maybe, and you're just going to get more profit out of that unit. So that would be, what we'd like to do is generate more profits, right? We want to keep what we have and do it well. That's sustaining. and then we want to make it better. That's generating more profit.
Okay. Now that's interesting because many times when I think of new revenue generation, I think of like building a whole new plant or, something like that. And now you went overseas, worked in the Middle East and built some new facilities overseas. I think you had told me in the past, right?
Right. Yeah. These were billions of dollars units. They were new. But even in that same assignment I had, we debottlenecked the older existing units as well. And generally, debottleneck or improvements on existing units are smaller in scale, but generally very high returns. And they compete with the sustaining capital just to run the plant for funding. So, yeah, I think,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So then it's not just my misconception of building new plants. You're saying that the more common thing is new revenue generation coming from making upgrades or improvements or expansion capabilities or things like that from existing facilities. That's really interesting.
You spend a lot on that, and certainly it's more projects. You may indeed, depending on the company, spend more on big projects than these small profit generating projects, but you have a lot more of those smaller projects. There's a lot more opportunities, and they're harder to manage this whole portfolio of projects.
Okay.
That's the key. Yeah.
Perfect. Now, Cicely, you had mentioned to me, I think before, that when you worked in the UK, you said you were in the UK working on some water projects, that there were certain goals and objectives that had to be met. You said like regulatory objectives or maybe sustainability kind of objectives. Dan, that's a third category, right? Is meeting corporate goals and objectives?
Yeah, I would say corporate goals and objectives that can be strategic objectives that may or may not be directly related to either sustaining or profit generating. ESG is kind of related to those, but it's also a bit more strategic, and maybe that would be an example of that. Could be a real strategic goal of the company to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by a certain time frame, something like that.
Yeah. Cicely, how did you see those things being met, when you were working on those water projects? Maybe not, that's not the right question. Not how did you see them being met, but were they a strategic component of success, for those companies like that?
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No, it's
What we saw in the UK was in the water market a strong desire and even regulatory requirement, increasing requirement to consider those kind of more historically qualitative, difficult elements to try to identify and make not just a strategic objective, but part of the planning process. So things around like stream, not remediation, but looking at how they manage the streams that they're using to potentially discharge in or take water from. Looking at things like the community and assisting vulnerable customers, including those in part of their decision-making process and understanding the value of alternative decisions when they're looking at assessing projects to understand the additional value that some of the alternatives can bring, not just as we've talked about the sustaining elements and growth kind of projects, but looking at every project and understanding its impact to those kind of things, including, carbon footprint and those kind of social elements as well.
So I guess we have a lot of competing, demands. Dan, you broke it down into, maybe three different categories. You said sustaining, new revenue generation, and what Cicely was just talking about meeting, corporate goals and objectives. So I see, if we look at, why this is important is that all these things become extremely important to the companies, that you're working at. And I see how important it is to meet all those, core goals and objectives: safety, risk, revenue growth, sustaining your operations, maintainability, all those things, as well as meeting, the regulatory requirements and those ESG sustainability goals. That sounds like a very complex environment, right? I mean, it's very complex, Dan.
Yeah, it is. I think just the first two is complex enough. Companies have a heck of a trouble do that. And remember, you're doing this across what I would call economic cycles. When you're executing capital, it's less predictable than operating routines, because capital projects are a little harder to manage and predict exactly how they're going to turn out. So you have this kind of feature where the capital itself changes during execution. You have economic cycles that sometimes require you to change your capital budget as you're executing it. And so you have to be agile in how you think about your capital plan so that you can meet the goals and objectives and cash flow of the company under a number of different scenarios. So that happens all the time. And what's making this now, I think, much more complicated is all these companies have these very long-term ESG goals today. And that's a good thing for our planet. It's a good thing for these companies and you know, for everybody. It's a good thing. But they've made these goals about circular economy, using renewable feedstocks, lowering carbon footprint, and very, very big goals. And I think a lot of these companies don't know exactly how they're going to do that. And we know it's going to require capital, and that's going to be on top of the capital for those first two areas we talked about. So it's going to make it even tougher, I think, as we move forward.
Okay. So we've been talking about, you know, the why this is important, and that's really good. I'm starting to get a good feel for, you know, the complexity of the problem and why these things are important. Obviously, you know, they're important. I mean, corporations are there, you know, they have to operate in a safe and effective manner. They're there to make money. We have to operate in environments where we're not in control of all the factors that affect us, you know, like regulatory or cost increases or labor shortages. So I see that there's a lot of reasons why this is an important factor. Hey, listen, we're going to shift and talk a little bit about how people are addressing these things. Before I do that, I just wanted to remind people out there that if you have any questions or if you want to tell me where you're located at, you know, I see we have a visitor from Botswana. And so, you know, we always have people from all over the world, you know, that are watching. And I wanted to welcome Bauki to watching from Botswana. Thanks for joining us. It's great. And if any of the others of you out there that are watching, which we have a lot right now, want to tell me where you are, I'll throw your name up on the screen and we'll give you a little shout out. But thanks for watching. But especially if you have any questions, let us know if you have any questions. So let's go on now here. We've been talking about why, and I want to take a little bit of a shift and talk about how, because, you know, execution is an important part of success, of course. All right. We all know we need to do something, and we all understand how difficult it is and the struggle we have and the things that are the pressures that are against us. But, you know, Dan, how did you go about, you know, attacking such a complex problem? What was the key elements of attacking the complexity of making those good decisions?
Yeah. I think first of all, I've grown in this industry and grown with organizations that got better and better over time. Unfortunately, I never had a tool like what Cicely and her group is doing to do this, but we did it kind of the old-fashioned way and did very similar work processes. So to really level understanding of different types of projects. So you have different businesses, they're all very complex and they all change all the time. You have different plants with different ages of assets. You have different risk factors, safety, environmental, reliability, et cetera. And you've got to somehow level how you think about those across all those projects so that you really do the thing that's most important to create value for the company or sustain value for the company. And a lot of the internal work is around scope control and making sure when you do a project, you only do what you need to do to get that done. It's more needs versus wants and no urban renewals, all those sorts of things. But once you get past that scope control, then you start selecting between projects. And to really manage risk at a given level, you have to have a really strong team and a really good process to do that efficiently. And efficiency means you're going to spend less capital for the same amount of risk management. And that's really important.
Okay. All right. Cicely, you had sort of mentioned at another time when we talked that you sort of had this methodology or framework in your mind, you know, of how you attack something like that. What is it that you look at when you say how I'm going to address, you know, the complexity of a problem?
Yes, absolutely. So at Copperleaf, I'd say we have, for lack of a better word, a framework that we use when we work with our clients. And it bases on three kind of pillars. First, we identify, then we assess, and then finally we optimize. So when I say identify, we find that common, that those strategic goals, and then we work with our clients to understand how they're going to assess those goals. So it's one thing to say that this is a goal, but it's another thing to say this is how we're going to assess it and measure that we're meeting that goal. And then that helps to build a framework within that company, within our client's company, that can help provide governance and transparency. And then next we go to the assessment. So Dan talked about the different projects and alternatives that a company wants to move forward. Well, we're going to help our clients assess each one of those projects that they put forward and understand how that project is going to provide value to the organization that's aligned to those strategic goals that we first identified. And then, Dan also talked about scoping. So when we work with our clients and they define the different alternatives, they define the scope for each one of those projects. So they have a full and complete understanding of the value each of those alternatives for that project can bring. And then finally, when we bring it all together into a portfolio, we do an optimization. So understanding how that portfolio of projects is going to bring the best value and most value to that organization through risk mitigation, through understanding resource constraints, understanding spending constraints, and then also do that next step of also thinking about scenario analysis of not just low, medium, and high, but a little bit more sophisticated scenario evaluation of what happens in the event of the feedstock prices increasing, or there being a crash in demand. So you can run through the scenarios of what that optimized plan looks like in each one of those occurrences, so that you have a bit more of a long-term plan that you can immediately be agile and operationalize if one of those future worlds comes to pass.
Yeah, well, that's all really very interesting. And one of the things that comes to mind, is Dan, you were talking a bit about, you had to have a methodology and a framework now, but you were faced with needing to do those things in a manual, kind of an environment, right? And so when you were trying to assess your methodology of evaluating projects and how to make a decision and having a framework, how did you go about doing that when you were faced with not using like advanced digital tools? What was your approach to doing that?
Yeah. So, really every plant would have a project spreadsheet, and I'm talking hundreds of projects at each plant. And then you would roll that up to a corporate spreadsheet, which was even bigger if you're talking about 20 plus plants and, hundreds of projects at each plant. You're into thousands of projects. And so it's very difficult to do that. And then, to put some process and systems around it, you got to standardize on definitions, and some plants do that well, some plants don't. So you really got to have some central control to make sure that the standards are met. And it's just a lot of work. And then I think what happens is like during COVID as an example, that's a very extreme example, but everybody had to reset their capital plan. This is public information, but Lyondell was at 2.4 billion for a plan that year, and we adjusted to 1.9. So that's an example. And to go through that took an enormous effort of every business, every plant, every corporate group was all involved to make that happen. Now, thankfully, we had a pretty disciplined process on how to evaluate risk, and that was a great starting point for us. But we didn't have the tools that Cicely's talking about that were really fairly easy to use. And I think that's, the ideal capital planning process is more of an evergreen process, and it's more agile, and you can run different scenarios and evaluate different aspects of a project. And that's very difficult to do with spreadsheets, to be honest with you, just is.
So you basically were faced with, creating standards, creating a framework, spreadsheets, PowerPoints, figuring out how to assemble all that and to create your framework to be able to do a proper evaluation analysis. Now, Would you consider that? I know this is a difficult question, but would you consider that have been to an effective way? I'm not trying to trick you. I'm just asking you. Was that effective? Did it work?
Oh, it did. It had to.
Yeah.
It worked by definition. And I think the fact that we had run in our normal planning and budgeting process, we had run some different scenarios. So we kind of had a head start because we had like what happens if something bad happens. So we didn't really predict it, but we had some preloaded, some low kind of thinking cases, and we started there, right? When we were making those adjustments. But yeah, you have to have great processes. If you don't, you really don't have a chance.
Yeah.
If you tell people, everybody cut your capital by 10%, what happens is one plant will cut a critical safety project while another plant might be paving a road, right? And you can't, it's just, you don't need to pave a road when you're cutting critical safety projects, to be honest. So you have to think about it enterprise-wide, and you have to have that lens to say, we're not going to be paving roads at a time when capital is highly constrained. Yeah. We're going to be doing our safety and environmental things, and we'll feather in things like profitable growth and other things, but not until we've taken care of the have to do stuff. And that's
so Dan, what I'm seeing is that you had to, by necessity of the business, to create an effective process. It had to be effective, in order for the business to operate. Now, an efficient process is a different story, because, because the reason I'm asking this is that there may be people sitting out there today that say, well, what we do today is effective. It works. Okay. Well, yeah, you had to create an effective process. But what I always tell people about digital is that technology is an enabler. Okay. Technology doesn't solve the problem. Technology enables greater success. All right. And what we can do is we can look at our effective processes and our frameworks and our methodologies we use, and we can model them in digital, and we can use digital transformation and more advanced analytics to be able to create a more efficient process, out of that. And then when you just said, hey, I had to completely replan, and I had to, reduce my budget by $500 million, by $500 million, is that it was at that point in time that you're like, boy, I bet that was a big exercise, to go back through and redo all that. Now, the question I have for you, Cicely, is that once we put that into digital and have a digital framework, how does that affect our ability to be able to successfully do an optimization like that?
So putting everything into, all right, okay, so you've got everything in a framework now, you want to optimize it. The thing about putting it in, in a tool like that is you make sure that you never lose the elements in your portfolio that you predefined as important, as valuable. That's one. You make sure that you put constraints in so that you're always cognizant that you're not jeopardizing any of your risk your risk, not appetite, but priorities. You're making sure that when you're put in a position that you have to make those difficult decisions, you're doing it in a way that's responsible to your organization's stated goals. And I think the other thing that's really important is coming back to that transparency. You put it in a system that you can interrogate and that you can audit, so that you always know and can track, coming back to understanding, we made this decision, we made a change. What was that change? When did we make it? Who made it? And did we document why? That's one of the, I think, the challenges that you have in a spreadsheet. Yes, you can do a lot of that, but when I've worked with clients, that's one of the biggest challenges that they face was, managing that, tracking that change requirements in their capital planning.
Digital really enables us to do that, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yep. Hey, listen, I want to maybe talk about a couple of examples in the industry, if you have some. Before I do that, I want to acknowledge a couple of other people that are out there. We have a visitor from Texas. Looks like we have somebody down in your part of the neighborhood down there, Warren Wong. Welcome. Glad to have you with us today, Warren. And then over in Europe, we have somebody joining us from Denmark, Christiana Jorgensen. Thanks for joining us. It's always good to have people from all around the world, and glad to have you. If there's others out there, if you have any questions for our panel here today, feel free to put those into the comments. And I always like stumping people. They're always afraid somebody's going to come up with a really hard question. So if you came up with a really hard one, we could throw that up there, see if we can stump them. Hey,
so can I say hi to Morgan and Christina? Thanks,
Okay.
guys. Great to see
Great.
you.
Good.
Hey,
Good.
let me say hello to Warren at LyondellBasell. He's one of these guys that did what I was talking about, figured out how to really tough, complicated project, figured out how to get the scope right and really improve the cost and the executability of a really tough problem. So Warren, I saw him on there, and great guy and great effort on his part. So thanks,
Great.
Warren.
So what company does Warren work for today?
LyondellBasell, I believe. At least I think so.
He used to. Okay. All right. Very good. Well, welcome. Well, I always like having people from industry, watching. It's always good to get people's contributions and things. So thanks for joining us today. Hey, listen, Dan, I know people always like to hear about, real world situations. And I know you've seen a lot and you've been through a lot of different things. Can you give us maybe just a short little case study of something you saw or something you walked through and what the real valuable impact of that was?
Yeah, I gave you the example of what had to happen with COVID readjustments of capital plans, which was a lot of work. But before that was done, we really worked hard on our process, and you really hit the nail on the head. I think we had an effective process, but it was a lot of hard work. It wasn't as efficient as what you can do if you're using these digital tools. So it just wasn't. But what I think what we did is really set, the standards of what you had to do to manage risk. And we had some experts in the company. If you were going to do a project on a furnace, you would meet the standards of excellence there and do the have tos, not the want tos for sustaining capital. And then also on the profit generating projects, the smaller ones, a lot more scrutiny around the real financial incentives, because sometimes you can do a lot of these profit generating projects and you're done and you're not making any more money. So you really have to be disciplined that in fact, they're going to have the benefits they say we'll have. So it's again, that scoping work and that scrutiny around the project that it will do what you say it's going to do. And then you've got all this complexity with businesses, plants, and project types, and all of that, and you have to get that framework in place. And I think we did an effective job of doing that, and it really changed the landscape. And I think what can be done today is not only make that effective, but make it efficient, because it was a lot of work to do it, and it just is. And I would say. Because I've been in the industry for 40 plus years and done a lot of budget cycles, I always think it's easier to do an operating budget, which is complicated enough, but it's easy enough because the plants kind of make the same thing every year and they buy the same feedstocks and utilities and labor and it's maintenance, et cetera. It's a little easier to predict. Capital is much tougher because you're doing different projects every year. You have different needs, you identify different risks, and how you address those is really important. And so having an effective and efficient process to do that, to manage capital, is really important. And I think what I think of an efficient process, I think it's almost evergreen, and it requires a lot less people work, and the machine is doing more smart work with your data. And you still have to validate conclusions and all that sort of thing, but you get a workable project much quicker, because what happens is you go through iterations. Every time you capital plan, you come back, everybody puts in what they think they need to do, and it's way too much. And so you just go through this cycle. And, I've seen that for 40
Dan,
years.
one of the things that I think we all saw during this economic downturn was the need to be more agile. Okay. And, for us to be able to evaluate factors around us and then to be able to shift and move in different directions. And, Cicely, when you put things into digital, it gives us the ability to be able to do that. I mean, heaven's sakes, if we look way back into time and people had, paper written ledgers and they wrote things down, and they had to redo it, they had to redo the paper written ledgers and start over again. Well, we put things into spreadsheets, and that made it easier for us. But now that we have things in more of a dynamic environment using really advanced digital transformation and advanced analytics, it gives us the ability to really, do optimization and create efficiency like what Dan is, really talking about. Cicely, have you seen, demands to be more agile during these times?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the main things our clients look for when they talk to us and talk with us about the benefits that they're looking for in a system. Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Dan, if we look at benefits, if people put things into a really structured, kind of a framework and have a good methodology, what kind of value can people look at maybe getting out of improving their efficiency, if you want to put it that way?
Yeah. Well, I think because I saw it in the couple of companies I worked with where we did it right. And I've talked to a number of project execution professionals across the industry, but I think the effective process here can get the same thing done for the same requirements done for maybe 20% less capital is what I would say. So if it's risk management and your target is a certain risk tolerance, you can get to that level if you have a very effective process. And I think it needs to be efficient too.
Those are some really big numbers, 20% though. I mean, that's huge.
20%. Yeah. And I think it's about selecting the right project. It's about getting the right scoper on the project. And it's about really getting the risk management for the dollar spend that you're getting. And I think, if I were working again in a company that didn't have those processes, I'd be targeting 20% efficiency, to be honest. So less capital.
Yeah, that's really that's good to hear, because I know that the other industries that I've worked in the past, that by applying digital to we always look at digital transformation as multiple components. It's people, processes, technology. You have to put all those together, and people have to believe that this is possible, and then you have to have people that are successful in doing this, and you have to have good, efficient processes and technology that enables success. And when you look at that and put all those together, you can create really dramatic improvements. And I've seen that across the industries. And so I'm not surprised when you tell me that 20%, is achievable. And if you look at companies that are spending hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, hey, look, that's an awful lot of money that can be applied, toward either optimizing your sustaining operations or maybe creating new revenue. And so, boy, that's really interesting. Hey, listen, we're going to begin to wrap this down. And what I wanted to tell people is that we have a webinar that we're doing. Dan is going to be returning with us. And we're also going to have Phil Jones from Copperleaf there, one of Cicely's, co-workers. And we're going to drill down a little bit deeper. And I'll just say that if you've watched this series for the last 3 weeks, this is our third in the series. And if you've heard some interesting things and you'd like to learn more about how maybe in your company or corporation, you might be able to take your company to the next level. Listen, let me say something about digital transformation. Everybody has existing systems, solutions, and processes in place today. All right. Dan said it. We have to have effective processes in place. And so you're looking at it and you're saying, well, is it really worth my time and effort to look at doing something different? All right. All I can tell you is that you need to look left and you need to look right and you need to look at what other people are doing and say, are they doing things more efficiently? Are people gaining more value from their capital dollars and their capital spend, by putting in more efficient processes? I think you need to evaluate that for yourself. And we're trying to provide you with different opportunities to be able to do that. This webinar that we have coming up, we're going to drill down to the next level. It's 2 weeks from today. I wanted to offer for, if you're watching, that you can come to this webinar. If you go to that URL down below, registerme.name, you can register for this webinar. And you can get a little bit more detail about how people are doing this today and how they're creating this kind of success. Look, how would you like to be the hero and bring 5, 10, 15, 20% improvement into your organization? It'd be a big impact to an operation if you're able to do that. I just suggest, is it worth 60 minutes of your time to look at something like this and see if possibly there are some opportunities to be able to help optimize and make your operation more efficient. Hey, listen, Dan and Cicely, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your knowledge of the industry and the journeys that you've both been on. I really like talking to people that are in industry. Dan, hey, let me ask you guys one last final question. Listen, I know this is, sort of off the path here, but I always like to ask people this question. Dan, at this particular time in industry, what's exciting to you about what kind of opportunities exist to people that maybe didn't exist before?
Well, 10 years ago in North America, it was shale, and it revolutionized the industry, and we built a lot of new plants, and it took off. And I think the new opportunity is coming out of ESG. First of all, the products that the chemical industry makes are needed for life. They're used in medical products. They're used in food preservation. They're lighter weight. They improve energy consumption. I mean, they're absolutely necessary. So we got to figure out how to make them better, and we got to figure out how to recycle them better, and provide less waste. But it's going to be a huge opportunity, and it's really, these people are setting goals to 2050. So we got to get the talent to do it, and we got a lot on our plate, and I think it's going to be very exciting to watch this industry over the next 30 years.
That's fantastic. That is. Cicely, how about if I ask you the same question? What are you excited about today, that maybe just a few years ago wasn't even possible?
Yeah, I think I kind of mirror Dan in his view. I think that the biggest opportunities are obviously some of the biggest challenges that we're looking to solve. I think for the chemicals industry, I'm really interested in seeing how circular economy is being adopted and how you look at non-traditional feedstocks. And I think that, that's kind of a bit downstream from the energy revolution and a lot of focus on decarbonization. I think these are some of the biggest challenges that are creating some great opportunities. And the thing about it that excites me is that at Copperleaf, we have that framework that allows companies to look at those kind of challenges and code those into their decision-making process to make sure that we marry that digitization, that opportunity, that technology to the real boots to the ground goals that people say they want to overcome.
Perfect. Hey guys, thanks for sharing that with us today. I always like to kind of know what people's passions are and what excites them. And so that was good information. Hey, listen, everybody out there watching today, I again wanted to invite you on February 16th to join our webinar coming up. I think you'll gain even more greater, insight into the tools that might be available to you to create success in your organization. So join us, go register at registerme.name. And I look forward to seeing you on that webinar. Cicely and Dan, thank you so much for bringing your knowledge and your strategies and your tactics, to this conversation. I appreciate you being here today.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
And to everybody watching, fair winds and following seas. And I wish you a great day. Thanks for joining us. See you in 2 weeks.